RRA has the obligation of taking back and destroying every kilo of refrigerant that's installed in the marketplace, in equipment throughout Australia. But we're largely relying on the contractors and the technicians to do the right thing, put it in the cylinder before we can do our part. Now we've probably got one of the best programs of its kind in the world, but we still think we're probably only getting somewhere between maybe 45 and 55 percent of what's being retired out of equipment at any one time. So our success is still limited, even with the best program in the world. So when we look at different sectors, we can see that we've got really good data in Australia. That's one thing we do really well. So we know what type of equipment's installed, we know what type of refrigerant it's on, how big the banks are, we know the average retirement age of equipment, so we sort of know what we should be getting back and when. And what we can identify, in making some assumptions there, is sectors that we think perform badly are, getting back equipment at end of life, split system air conditioners, and also motor vehicles, getting the refrigerant out of end of life motor vehicles. We see that as two sectors that we can really try and target to improve those recovery rates of equipment at, and mainly at obviously at end of life. So we can look at different targeted approaches on how we might do that. Communication is key. One thing that we've alluded to through this whole thing is within the industry we're quite good at speaking to each other. But it's educating the householders to do the right thing. It's about educating so the householder that they need to recover the refrigerant from their end-of-life piece of equipment, and they need to pay for that service. I think largely people will want to do the right thing if they know what it is they need to do. So it's about education, it's about communication, and it's about improving in that area. Largely I'd love to see greater compliance and enforcement. That is out of RRA's hands. But what we can do is, as I said, look at ways we can, communicate better, incentivise different sectors and things like that to improve those rates of recovery.
When we take over a building, we take a photo of the asset and we nominate its remaining life as best as we can and its replacement cost. So we've made it visible. Photo, remaining life, replacement cost. But guess what? The minute you show that to a customer, a landlord, and you never show it to them again, what happens do you think about 2 months later? They forget. So how do you keep that asset visible? Every time the tradesman goes to site to either do maintenance or repairs, either reactively or proactively, you force him to say, oh, I worked on that. I worked on that. You can't go to a job and do a repair without saying, this is the asset I touched. So then you've actually then got, so we invoiced $800 and we touched that asset, either reactively or proactively, but we touched it and this is what we did on it. That's how. So then when you look at the asset, what do you see? You see a picture of it and then you see all the times we went and touched it either through maintenance or repairs and what we invoiced to that. That's it. That's it. So then you go, wow, it's worth $58,000 to replace. It's got 3 years of life, and in the last 12 months we spent $12,800 on it. Now, to what percent accurate? I would say about 70%. I'd love to get it to 90. There's a whole bunch of very boring reasons why we haven't been able to do that, but 70% is better than nothing. But the burden it puts on our tradespeople is that they need to tell us the assets they're working on. Now, on a mobility app, you've got to put stickers on, you know what I mean, you can scan the barcode. But those things are not easy to do and it costs money. But you have to have a very long-term perspective that, to your point, to be proactive, we've got to make the asset visible and keep it visible. So can we get the whole industry to do that?
Well, that's the next question. Should RRA, should they provide support for companies that do reclaim?
So RRA, as far as I know, since it came about in the 90s, have provided a financial incentive for people or technicians to recover refrigerant. So we do that by paying a rebate. Largely that's done through the wholesale network. So the wholesaler will pay the the contractor the rebate, but RRA would do reimburse them. So ever since RRA was came about, we've been paying this financial incentive. Even when so we did this when reclamation was voluntary, but we also continued it after it became mandatory. And there's long been that argument of you don't get paid not to speed. Should we be paying this incentive? And we believe that while we're in a position where we can, we should continue to support paying the rebate for people to do that right thing. It might make the difference between, doing the right thing. There's a question over whether that rebate's, high enough. But, it's something that we're considering as an organisation. But largely, reclamation would be a good thing for low GWP products. So if we look at, again, the split system sector, for example, we know that it's the largest installed bank is, in 410A in, split system air conditioners, if we look at the installed bank in Australia. Now, as the market moves to R32, if we're looking at when the equipment becomes redundant or reaches its end of life, there's not going to be a market to replace 410A. But 410A is made up of 50% R32 and 50% 125. So in this case, it would make sense to reclaim the 32 and send me back the high GWP part of that, which is the 125. So I think that reclamation absolutely has a place, but we can also see the perverse outcomes of doing that for products that, something like, as Greg mentioned before, about something like 404A, which has a high GWP. There are safe, alternatives, retrofit alternatives available. We should be encouraging them to be used and maybe even encouraging the early retirement of these products. And, the one thing that is front of mind is that while we've got high GWP product installed in equipment, it has the opportunity to leak. So what we'd love to see is the early retirement of high GWP products. Again, 404 is a classic example of that, where there are safe, commercially available low GWP alternatives available for that equipment. And it's looking at ways that we can incentivise that change to happen, voluntarily without intervention from government, and what we can do, work with organisations that want to make that change, want to reduce their environmental footprint, and things. So watch this space. In an ideal world, if I had a wish list, I think it would be a combination of things. I think we've already, many of those ideas we've discussed already, in this table today. We've got opportunities where we can put equipment bans in where it makes sense to do so, and where that change is occurring anyway. It's just sort of cleaning up that tail end. So we've got that opportunity. We've got the opportunity for organisations to, retrofit out high GWP products and put that in. There could possibly be, as Greg mentioned, service bans. So if there's a piece of equipment that needs to be serviced and there is a lower GWP safe alternative product available, why aren't we using that? That's really hard to police, hard to enforce. But this is my wish list. That would make sense to do that and utilise that. I'd like to see maybe bans on reclamation of GWP products. And we need to be. We've seen the perverse outcomes, and we need to be sensible about doing how we do that. It would need to be staged, and it would need to be forecasted and staged and planned, so we don't get the perverse outcomes that we've seen in Europe, and other areas. So there's lots that there are lots of possibilities. We just need to, as I said, work together as an industry. We need to consult with government and work together.
There's a whole other range of things we can do in terms of expanding the current licensing program to cover all refrigerants, to cover the sensible energy efficiency activities that tradespeople can do. So there's a range of other things that isn't about equipment, but is about how tradespeople interact with the equipment, where we can also make improvements through appropriate regulation. But the broader point, just adding that, but there's a broader point I wanted to make, which is, and I don't have a whiteboard, so I'm going to ask you to go with me on a sort of visual little exercise here. Emissions today of HFCs are about 8 million tons per year, carbon dioxide equivalent. Remember the number 8. By 2040, they're projected to be about 2.5 million tons. So it's a nice curve, right, going down. But the interesting thing is if you look at the shape of that curve, it's not a straight line. There's the thing. And this is because of how the phase down works. And so what happens is if you draw a line right in the middle and you look at the area under the curve, under both bits. So how much emissions are we going to have in total between now and 2031 and 2031 and 2040? 70% is in the next 9 years, only 30% in the 9 years that follows. More than 2 to 1. And what does that mean? That means that the time for RRA to shine, and I fully believe it can, is absolutely right now. The time for all of us to meet the challenge of what is in the bank is absolutely right now. The quota is going to work. The phase down is going to work. It's clear it's going to work, but it works over time. And the question is, where do we still have pain in terms of our industry's performance? And where we have pain is what's in the existing bank. And I'm just talking about refrigerants. I'm not even talking about how we heard from Nick and Kyle and others about, maybe I am answering the question a bit holistic, about energy. The same thing is true. It's about what we can do now to shift towards the higher efficiency equipment that can. So I guess just sort of my thought in closing is this isn't, while this may have been a really speculative conversation about all the things we can do, what we can't do, what we cannot afford to do is blind ourselves to the absolute true reality that the time to take action is today. It's not tomorrow, and it's certainly not 10 years from now. We need to get on with what it is we can do, because that's how we can have the most impact on the environmental issues associated with this. And I think we all want to do it. And the great thing about this, because, let's be clear, we're basically a commercial group around this table, is we can do this in an environment where companies can prosper, where the trade can prosper, where the industry can prosper, where consumers can prosper. There doesn't have to be losers here. We can just have winners, but we have to act decisively. We need to do it promptly.
Now, the beauty is we've actually got history. We've done this before. We've transitioned away from R22. We've transitioned away from CFCs like R11 and R12. We've got form. We've got proven track record that industry can do this and deliver these outcomes. So this should be, this is something that industry can do, and as I said, there can be, many winners.
So my closing thought is don't fear the change. Moving away from high GWP is certainly not the end, it's absolutely an opportunity. I have the lived experience through the experience of New Zealand, where we have phased out 404 entirely. Every new bit of kit we put in, we're doing either glycol, 448, 452, and it's all working fine. Don't fear the change.